Welcome to this lesson, HTML, JavaScript. We're going to be looking at uh, JavaScript, examples of what JavaScript is. We are not going to be going into too much detail, just how we use JavaScript to affect and to add some interactivity to our HTML. So, what is JavaScript? JavaScript, as we discussed in the introductory chapter lessons, is used to add interactivity and make HTML pages more dynamic. So, we are gonna look at that in the next, not lesson, but in the next coding examples that we have. So, let's look at an example. I have my index.html. So let's write some HTML. We have our doc type, and then we have our HTML. And then what do we have? We have our body. And we could put a head, but we are not in this gonna use it, but I'm just gonna put it there just for completeness. And then we have our body. And then in the body, we have want to have h1, which says that my very first HTML with JavaScript. Okay, that's your header. And then, so let me just refresh this. And you have that, my very first HTML with JavaScript. So, what we can do here is we're going to add some JavaScript in here, right? And so, in the, and sorry, maybe let me add a paragraph to this. Let me add a p tag here and put in uh, an ID. Sorry, put in here an ID and call this uh, first, right? So that's the name of my ID for this element called first, right? You can name it anything you want that doesn't say anything, right? So we are also going to have a button in here. So let's put a button, right? This is a button, and I'm gonna put a type called button. Oops, double T-O-N. So this is a button called button, and it has a type, right? And then I'm gonna say I'm gonna put uh as the button description or the label, click me to display dates and time, right? So let me refresh this. So you have this button saying click me to display date and time, right? That's all. And then you have your P, but there's really nothing in the P. There's no content. Let me just show you what I mean. If I put three dots, you probably see the three dots, but that's just it. But so I'm gonna remove it so you know that there's no content in the paragraph. So we just have this, right? So now what we are gonna do is we are gonna write our first JavaScript, which is gonna display the current date and time anytime we click the button, and it's gonna display it in the P uh, element, the paragraph, right? So let's go back to our HTML. So under the button, we are gonna add an on-click element, right? And then In this onClick, we are gonna use the documents dots get elements by ID. And what this document get element by ID does is it fetches, let me get this right. Get document by ID, and then you have to put in there the ID of what you want, which is in this case first, right? And then now that you have that element, what we want to do is say that find the inner HTML. So find the HTML in that, and then put in the date, which is like the current date. Okay, so I'm just gonna refresh this, run this, and then you see that the date and time displays. And I'm just gonna go over what just happened here. So, uh, and maybe I need to bring the onClick down so it's visible for you guys. Okay, so this looks good now. So what happens is, uh, for the button element, we have the type is about the attribute type is a button. Now we have an onClick, right? And what the onClick does is it's a function that executes anytime you click the button, or you are telling it to execute something or do something whenever you click the button. So anytime I click the button, it's going to try and do whatever it's in there, right? So, and this is the JavaScript, right? So the document.get element by ID gets the element that has the specified ID that you list here. So in this case, you put in first, it tries to get this element, which is the P element, right? Because the P element is what has this ID called first. So then it gets that element, and the dot inner HTML says that get me the inner HTML of this P tag, right? And then what you are saying is now pass this date, whatever today's date is. So this date gives you today's date with a time, right? So now pass this into the inner HTML, which is gonna be the content in here, right? So this inner HTML is whatever is inside this HTML element inner HTML, right? So this three dots is gonna be your inner HTML. So whatever it is, I'm saying I pass the date into this section right here. And that's why it displays the date and the time. So this is our very first Java script. And it's a little confusing for you. We're gonna talk about it some more uh, later down the line. Now let's look at another example, and I'm gonna just comment this out. First, let me copy it so I can edit it, and then I'm gonna comment this out, and then uh, I'm gonna make some changes to this. So we have our body, and here I'm gonna just say use JScript or JavaScript to change text. Okay, something like this. And then I don't need a button because I'm gonna do a different style. Okay, and then I'm gonna have my P ID. Let's just call it example. Okay, and then that's it, right? So if I refresh this, I'm just gonna have use JavaScript to change text. So how are we gonna use JavaScript to change text? There's no button to run like in the first example. What we are going to do is we are going to include a script tag in this, right? So I'm going to add a script tag, and the script tag is the tag that tells you um, that you can put in your JavaScript, right? So you can type in your JavaScript in here. So again, the document, you want to get the ID of your P, right? So it's the same thing. You're going to use the document dot get element by ID, and then what do? You pass in the ID, which is what? Example, and I see it now that I typed example W, which is wrong. So yeah, so now I get this P element, and then I want to write into the dot inner HTML, and I want to pass which value? Let's say hello world, right? And then semicolon to close it, right? So now if I just refresh this, I have my hello world, right? And so JavaScript just, even though we did not physically write it in the element, the content, well, what JavaScript did was it said, get me this ID and write this value in there. So that's what happened. And that's what we want you to see, that JavaScript can dynamically change HTML content, right? So you can see here that it had a script, and the script tag is used to define the JavaScript, the client side JavaScript, right? And this works on the browser, the client side browser. So uh, the script element contains statements that, when executed, can modify HTML, right? You can also use it to point to an external script, and just for yeah, it can also use to point to an external script. So let's explore the possibility of creating an external JavaScript and then calling it in our HTML. So we have the same command right here. I'm going to copy it, created a test.js, and then I pasted it in here. So it's the exact same thing, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out, right? So we have nothing here, right? So I'm just going to create the same script, and now I'm going to reference the file that we created. So what we are going to do here is we are going to have uh, type, which is going to tell you what type of script it is. And here we're going to say this is a text slash Java script. And then the next thing that is important that we need to put is the source. So the source tells you what file it is. So we're going to look at test.js. So it references the test.js, and then I refresh it, and now you have your hello world. So that's how we can access our JavaScript file in this manner, right? So let's look at a third example. So again, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it down here, and I'm going to comment this out. First, let me uncomment this, and then, oh yeah, let me just comment this whole thing out now, and then I'm going to make some change to this, right? How to use JavaScript. How to use JavaScript. And then I'm going to have an ID, uh, and in this ID, I'm going to call it example. And I'm going to say, okay, JS can change the style of uh, of elements, right? Can change the styles of elements, right? And then I'm gonna have a button. Let me just delete all this and say I need a button, and I want the button should be of type button, and I want it to have an on click, meaning when you click it, I want it to do what? Okay, run a function called my function, right? And let me use camel case, right? So anytime I click the button, and I'm gonna refresh this, run it called run. Okay, maybe the function I have a label. I need to add that. Let's say click me. So I have this button say click me, and anytime I click it, it's supposed to run a function called my function, right? I don't have a function like that yet, so it doesn't do anything, right? So let us now do something else. Let's first add a script to this, right? So I'm going to copy this and add the script, right? And point it to test.js, the same one. And now let's put what we want to happen. So in this script, I'm going to create a function called my function. And I understand that we haven't really talked about functions and all that. We'll talk about it in the main JavaScript section. So just try to follow along with me. So in this function, we are now going to do whatever we want it to do. So we're going to first get our document dot get element by ID. And then what ID do we want to get? We want to get the example ID. So I'm going to put in here example and then say dot style because we want to change the style, and dot what style do we want to change. I'm looking at the font size, so we can change the font size and say giving a 20 or 30 pixel font size, right? So that's the first thing we want to change. We have our semicolon, and I can copy this again. Maybe we want to change multiple things about that paragraph element. So what else do you want to change? Let's say we want to change the color. And this time we want it to be red, right? And then finally, we want to change the background of that element. So dots, background, and then put in there orange, if that works. And so if I refresh this, I see the hello world, but I don't see the formatting change. And that is because, yes, I see why now. That is because the script was placed, the reference to the script was placed underneath the button. So when you click the button, right, if I click the button, I see it here. But if I needed to make this work, what should have happened, and I have to refresh this first, right? is that the script needs to be seen before the body. So normally we can put the script here. If I can cut this, I can either put it even in the head. So it's already, it knows that you have a script in your section. So if I refresh this and click it, it's always there, right? So that is uh that is what you can do. So you can put it in the head or in the body, but preferably you can put it in the head, right? So it already knows that you have a JavaScript called test.js, which we have here with all these styles, uh, saying that click this, and then your inner HTML, for example, changes to hello world, and then this function here now comes into play, right? So you get it, you change the text, you change the color, and then you change the background, right? So you can click this, and then you have the edits to this, right? So if you look up back at the HTML, that is what is happening. Anytime you click the button, my function is a function that executes, which is stored in your JavaScript file. And your JavaScript file is right here with my function. And so these are all the things that change once you click it, right? So as you can see, if I refresh it, I click it, you see the change showing right there. Finally, what we want to discuss is so the HTML no script tag, and normally this is used uh, to define an alternate content to be displayed to users that have disabled scripts in their browser or have a browser that doesn't support scripts, right? I don't know why you would want to do that, but there are some people that have disabled it, and so you want to just display a simple message to tell them that sorry, your browser does not support JavaScript or something like that. So to do that in your scripts, wherever you want to put that, you can also put the no scripts, uh, and then in here you can just put sorry browser does not support JavaScript. Okay, and you're good to go. Yeah. So JS cannot change the styles of the element if you click it, but this supports it, so it doesn't show. But for the browsers that have disabled support for this, it will show you this message. So thank you, and this was just a brief, say, introduction to JavaScript. We have a whole section that we're going to look into so much more of this. And so, thank you for watching this, and see you in the next lesson.